Hey folks, welcome back to Canada's Boxing Channel. Hope everyone's doing well, having a good day. I thought it was time to take a career retrospective again and to look back at the career, life and times of another great fighter from yesteryear. The fighter I'm going to talk about is another fighter who never won a world championship, but is nevertheless somebody I think we ought to remember. And as always, these are just thumbnail sketches. This is the view from 20,000 feet. So I encourage you, if the person is of interest to you, to go and read up some more about them, look at some YouTube documentaries or other documentaries that might be out there. The person I'm going to talk about, ESPN once said, was the greatest fighter nobody knows. And today's serious boxing historians agree that Sam Langford, who was born on March the 4th, 1883, in Weymouth Falls, Nova Scotia, Canada, is one of the greatest fighters of all time. Now, most people, if they know about Sam Langford, they don't necessarily know that he was Canadian, because his most famous nickname was the Boston Tar Baby. And of course, Boston is in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which is in the United States of America. He had a very, very tough upbringing. Like many of the fighters that we talk about from yesteryear, they were raised in poverty, right? His grandfather actually was a slave in the United States of America, coming to Canada and starting his family there. And of course, you know, young Sam was the grandson. Now, Sam left Nova Scotia in his early teens because his father and he literally fought, fist fights. His father was an abusive person, and Sam wasn't having any of it and fought back. Of course, usually as a child would be getting the losing end of that equation. And he made his way to Massachusetts, where he took up a number of jobs, including he became a janitor in a boxing club, and that's what gave him his real love of the sport, his introduction to boxing. So he fought on the amateur circuit. He started at featherweight in the amateur circuit, and he won local tournaments. At just 16 years old, he turned professional in 1902, and he beat a person by the name of Jack McVicker by KO in round 5. Apparently his natural talent and toughness, together with his smarts, like he had ring IQ, was evident just from the start. He was only 5'6" tall, and he never weighed much more than maybe 180. So he was a very, and for much of his time, he was nowhere near that. That sort of, he would now be considered, at his prime, maybe like a middleweight, right? He was thought of to be an excellent inside fighter, and boxing historians say that he would have had a style on the inside that might have reminded us of the great Roberto Duran. From 1902 to 1914, he won 85 of 87 fights. Again, I'm going to get to his box record later on, but again, we have to remember that these times people were fighting sometimes every couple of weeks or more frequently. Now, Langford fought across multiple weight classes, from lightweight right the way through to heavyweight. And the most, chief or primary reason most people have never heard of Sam Langford is he never got to fight for a world title. And the chief reason for that is, sadly, because he was black. Nat Fleischer, the founder of Ring magazine, counted Langford among the 10 greatest heavyweights of all time. And that's an achievement that's even more impressive when we think that he started his career at a much, much, much lighter weight. He fought many of his fights at 135, which is be today's lightweight. Jack Dempsey, one of the most celebrated fighters in boxing history, and somebody we've done a story about, called Langford the greatest fighter he had ever seen. And in fact, Jack Dempsey said, and I'm going to quote, "The hell I feared no man. There was one man even smaller than I. I knew I wouldn't fight because I knew he'd flatten me. I was afraid of Sam Langford." Very high praise from Jack Dempsey, who I don't think was frightened of many people. So the praise is incredible, especially when you think of the source, right? So time and again, this young person from Nova Scotia would be denied opportunities to be champion. He did fight some champions. He fought the lightweight champion Joe Gans in a non-title bout, and he would later fight for Joe Walcott's welterweight title, though that fight was declared a draw. Most people believe that Langford won it, but A side gets the nod, and that's something that we still see right the way through to today, doesn't it? He was never given a rematch. Now at heavyweight is where Langford spent his most effective years. He was in line to fight the first black heavyweight Jack Johnson, but it's an interesting thing, and a lot of people don't really appreciate this. But the Jack Johnson, who was the first black heavyweight champion, ironically invoked the color bar and didn't give title shots to any other black fighters. Now, people have said that he didn't give Sam Langford a title shot because he knew Langford would beat him. And that might be true, and we can talk a little bit about that, because they did have one fight that wasn't a title fight. I will say this one thing in defense of Jack Johnson. While he did invoke the color bar, it's not because he, a black man, was racist, as much as he, a great champion, was also a very astute business person. And Jack Johnson knew that a black-on-black title fight simply wouldn't sell like a black-on-white title fight. So it's a sad but very true reality of the times. And I say that just to sort of provide some balance, because I have read that people say, well, Jack Johnson, he barred all other coloured fighters, as they were called then, from fighting against him. And that's true, but they don't provide much in the way of context around it. So I'm just sort of putting that there to give it a little bit of balance, if you like. Excuse me. For whatever reason, the truth is that for many, many years, Sam Langford was denied a world title shot. People simply didn't want their careers derailed by a man who would knock them out. And he had ferocious punching power. He also had advanced boxing skills. So Mike Silver, who's a boxing historian and author, says there was nothing that Langford did not do well. He was just about a complete fighter. He was very short, as we've seen. He was 5'6", right? But he had unusually long arms. Also, he was way ahead of his time as a boxer. He could fight on the inside, he could fight on the outside. If he had to fight on the inside, he knew how to get inside. He was a long distance, middle distance, and short distance fighter. He could do it all. He was also a devastating puncher, which was amazing because he carried his punch in every weight division he moved to. And that's something that, we see, even today, where a fighter might be devastating at 147. They move to 154 and they seem to have lost their punching power. Now, partly, of course, because they're fighting people who are bigger with greater punch resistance. But punching power isn't something you naturally carry as you get heavier yourself. Some of Langford's famous fights in 1903, of course, he had that lightweight battle with Joe Gans we talked about. It was a non-title bout, but Langford outpointed the legendary Gans, and that proved his skill very early on. In 1906, he got to fight Jack Johnson, and this might be the fight, if you wanted to say that Jack Johnson was frightened of Sam Langford, this might be the fight that sort of gives credibility to that argument. Jack Johnson was not yet world heavyweight champion, but he was an elite fighter, and he outpointed Langford over 15 rounds. Now, despite losing, Langford's performance was so strong that Johnson reportedly refused to fight him ever again. I say this because, balance. Is it because he was scared, or is it because he realized that the fight simply wouldn't sell? We don't know. That's the fact. And there's arguments that go either which way. But the fact of the matter remains that Jack Johnson never did give Sam Langford a shot at the heavyweight crown at any time that Jack Johnson was world heavyweight champion. Sam Langford did fight some up-and-coming top white contenders, fireman Jim Flynn, battling Jim Johnson. His power was legendary, and he was feared by pretty much every fighter of the era. Now, since the world heavyweight title was sort of considered to be off limits to black fighters, there was a world colored heavyweight championship. Jack Johnson had been a world colored heavyweight title, and Langford also competed for and won that title. Langford first won it in 1910. He fought other great black heavyweights of the time, Sam McVeigh, Joe Jeanette, and Harry Willis. And his rivalries spanned dozens of fights. You know, we think now if a fighter fights somebody 3 times, it's a big deal. And when we remember great trilogies in history, right? Ali Fraser, Ali Norton, you know. But in those days, if you go back even sort of like to the 50s, 40s, 30s even, so not back as far as we're talking here with Sam Langford, people would fight sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 times against the same fighter. Well, Langford and Harry Wills fought at least 17 times. Wills was the younger and larger fighter, and he had the upper hand in many of their later bouts. But Langford also knocked him out on multiple occasions, proving he could still fight elite opposition even though he was aging himself. Now, Langford fought into the late 1920s. BoxRec lists his last fight as being in 1926. But it's possible he might have even fought after then. But the point is that as he aged, he suffered from gradual blindness. He lost the sight of his left eye in a fight in 1917. And by the time he officially retired in 1926, so that's official retirement, not only was he 53 years of age, but he was nearly blind in both eyes. And it's reported that he would be, in his latter years as a fighter, he would fight based on hearing the shuffling of his opponent's feet on the canvas. So he couldn't really see at all. He would be legally blind by today's standards. And in fact, in the Mexican heavyweight title fight in 1923, he had to be led to the ring because he couldn't see his way to the ring. In his very last fight, according, that's listed in BoxRec, apparently the fight was stopped because Sam just simply couldn't see. So, but I have read that he might have even fought after that, sort of, in non-listed fights, right? Now, Sam Langford would never reap the benefits of his talent. And it's a sad truism that until the modern era, it was the secret fate or the dirty secrets or the universal truth, if you like, of boxing, that boxers were born poor and they died poor, regardless of what happened in the middle. And we see that with even legendary champions who, all-time greats even. I mean, poor Joe Frazier lived in a room behind his gym. Joe Louis was certainly not wealthy at the end. I mean, he was a greeter at Caesar's Palace, right? And so if you go back, another couple of generations, it's easy to see how many, many fighters would pass away in obscurity and poverty. And it's a tragedy that boxing has this history, really. For Langford, this was especially true. So in 1994, a journalist, Al Laney, who's a white journalist, was writing for the New York Herald, and he came to write a story on this great former boxer who was already being forgotten about. So less than 20 years after his career had ended, he was poor and he was blind and he was living alone in a one-room apartment in Harlem. Now, Laney published this article and a collection was taken up to pay for Langford's medical bills because he had no money to pay for medical bills. He could barely afford to sustain himself in the most impoverished of circumstances. And enough money was raised that he was a little small monthly stipend was made available so that he could live out the remaining years not in comfort, but in with some dignity and some basic necessities. As I said, he was several times the colored heavyweight champion. He fought all across North America for regional and national titles that people don't recognize today. He also had fought for other titles. He was at one point in time, he was the middleweight champion of Wales. He was the heavyweight champion of England, Spain, and of Mexico. And during his career, he was used to scare other fighters. Trainers used to say, you want to screw around during training? We'll make you with Langford. So you have a recalcitrant boxer who's not doing what the trainer wants. They would scare that boxer and say, you don't buck up your attitude, son. We're going to put you in with Sam Langford. And that was enough to make the boxer either say, yeah, okay, coach, I'm doing what I'm told to do, or okay, I'm done. I this isn't for me. So he was so fearsome that he would be used as a bogeyman to scare other up and coming boxers. That if you don't do what we want, we'll make the fight with Sam Langford. Sam Langford eventually passed away on January the 12th, 1956. Apparently it was in a private nursing home. So he had enough money to be able to have some dignity in his final days. And this was a year after he was finally recognized by the boxing community and enshrined in the Ring Hall of Fame. He was also inducted into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. So and I think that all happened in 1955. So a year before he passed, he was finally made aware that there was recognition given to him for his achievements. But the reality is he died with no assets to speak of and relatively unknown. He was recognized and inducted into the IBF International Hall of Fame in 1990. From 1902 until 1926, he was definitely a force in boxing. He earned the reputation for fearlessly fighting all comers. He, like I say, would be at most a middleweight sometimes. He would, go up in weight a little bit and down a little bit. But he was fighting against people who were so much bigger than him many times that those fights wouldn't be made today. I mean, boxing commissions simply wouldn't countenance a boxer fighting 5, 6, 7 weights above, right? He was thought to be a small man with a tremendous punch who carried that punching power. He may not have been a world champion, but I think he does deserve to be recognized for his contributions to boxing and also recognized as one of Canada's best athletes of all time, and that has been recognized. He was recognized as the Nova Scotian top male athlete of the 20th century in 1999, and he was also recognized as boxer of the half century by the Canadian press. Now, BoxRec lists his record as 178, 30 and 38, with 126 of those wins coming by way of. BoxRec also lists his total fights at 313. However, I would say 313 is also way too low. And the the Nova Scotia Chronicle Herald lists his total of fights at 642. And I would say that that's a much more accurate number than what you will see on BoxRec. So 600 and change fights over a career it really is something. There's a play written about Sam Langford. It's a Canadian play, and there's a Canadian theatre production that travels around putting this play on, and it's called Chasing Champions. I have not seen the play, but it does play a lot in Atlantic Canada, where of course Sam Langford is mostly remembered and memorialized. So, if you like this little career retrospective, possibly an introduction, if you haven't already heard of Sam Langford, to be interesting, please go and read up about him, and to let's just remember these great champions of the past. As you know, this is the thing that I very much enjoy talking about. Whether it's champions of the past that I remember from my youth, if you like, right back to people who were champions, and born and passed away before I was born. I think it's important as boxing fans that we embrace the history of the sport, that it's not just the glitz and the glamour that we see today in 2025, but it's built on something. That's my take anyhow. So it's important for me. Hopefully it's important for you. If you like this video, please like, please subscribe. It's totally free. Please hit that little button, and please share the video. Tell people about Canada's boxing channel, and remind them it's not just about Canadian boxing. In fact, it's very little sometimes about Canadian boxing. It's just because I happen to be located in Canada. But please pass the word. The channel is growing, and I think that's just amazing. So thank you very, very much for watching. Most importantly, have a fabulous day. Cheers. Bye-bye.